It's no secret that America has been through some tough times throughout its history. But what may surprise you is how recent some of these struggles are. Take, for example, the Bonus Army of 1932. This group of around 10,000 World War I veterans decided to band together and demand their hard-earned money from Congress. But things didn't exactly go according to plan. So what happened to them? Let's find out. The year was 1932, and the country was in the middle of the Great Depression. People were losing their homes, their jobs. Everything they had worked so hard for was slipping through their fingers. It was a time when people felt like they had nothing left to lose. And that's when an idea began to take shape in the minds of some World War I veterans. An idea that would bring them face to face with the full force of the American government. These men had fought in one of the deadliest wars in American history. They had seen things no one should ever see, done things they could never forget, and when they came home, they were supposed to have been welcomed as heroes, but instead they found themselves right back in the trenches, this time fighting for their very survival. Because let's face it, coming back from war is never easy. There are invisible wounds that run deeper than any physical injury. They had hoped that their service would be recognized, that their sacrifice would be honored. But as the years went by, they started to feel like they were being forgotten. But they weren't just any ordinary soldiers. They were part of the greatest generation, the ones who had answered the call of duty and defended the nation during its darkest hours. Now it was their turn to receive some support. So they decided to do something drastic. In February 1932, Congress passed a bill that granted them a bonus, a reward for their service. But the catch was that they wouldn't get paid all at once. Instead, it was spread out over several years. And for many of these veterans, that was just too long to wait. They needed the money now. With the economy in free fall, they couldn't wait for the government to pay them what they had already earned. They wanted it now, and they weren't going to take no for an answer. That's when the real trouble began. As the Great Depression tightened its grip on the country, more and more Americans found themselves without a job or a place to call home. But among the most affected were the World War I veterans. For many, the return from the battlefield had been anything but triumphant. They had come home to a nation that was struggling to cope with the aftermath of the war. The economy was in sharp decline, and jobs were scarce. With each passing day, it seemed as though the promises of a better future were slipping further and further out of reach. It was a cruel twist of fate for these men who had put their lives on hold to serve their country, only to come back to a world that seemed determined to forget them. But they weren't about to give up, not without a fight. The veterans had served their country with honor, and they believed that their sacrifice deserved recognition. As the months went by, their frustration grew, turning into anger, and eventually boiling over into action. The Bonus Army was born. By early 1932, the Great Depression had been raging for 3 long years. The stock market had crashed and the economy was in shambles. Unemployment was soaring and people were losing their homes and their jobs. It was a time of despair and hopelessness when it seemed like the entire nation was on the brink of ruin. In the midst of this economic turmoil, the World War I veterans found themselves in a particularly dire situation. Many of them had returned from the battlefields of Europe, only to be met with the harsh realities of the Great Depression. Jobs were scarce and the pay was low. They were struggling to make ends meet and provide for their families. But they weren't the only ones suffering. Across the country, people were desperate for change. The Bonus Army swelled to around 10,000 members. These men and women, many of them homeless, hungry, and jobless, were drawn together by a common cause. They had served their country with honor, and now they were being treated like second-class citizens. And so, they decided to take matters into their own hands. On March 4th, 1932, the Bonus Army set off from various locations across the country, all with the same destination in mind, Washington, D.C. Their goal was simple, but their determination was unwavering. They wanted their bonuses paid in full, and they weren't afraid to make their voices heard. As they made their way to the capital, they faced many obstacles. The journey was long and arduous, and many of them were injured or ill, but they pressed on, driven by their need for recognition and respect. Their numbers grew along the way, as more and more people joined their cause. Soon, they were marching as one, a sea of determined faces united by their struggle. Finally, on March 1932, the Bonus Army arrived in Washington, D.C. They had made it, but their victory was short-lived. The government had already made up its mind, and they were not willing to budge. Talks of compromise had fallen through, and now the veterans were being given an ultimatum. They had until noon to leave the capital, or they would be forcibly evicted. The veterans were furious, but they knew that they couldn't fight the government. They were outnumbered and outgunned, so they did the only thing they could do. They refused to leave, and that's when the violence began. On July 1932, President Hoover ordered the army to evict the Bonus Army. And so it began, a dark chapter in American history. The men and women who had once fought for the nation's freedom were now being attacked by the very government they had defended. It was a shocking display of force, and it sent shockwaves across the country. But as the dust settled, the true cost of this eviction became clear. 2 veterans had lost their lives, and many more were injured. The government had shown that it was willing to use any means necessary to maintain order. In the days that followed, the nation was divided. Some saw the Bonus Army's actions as a threat to the government and supported the eviction. Others viewed it as a desperate act by people who had been pushed to the brink and felt outraged at the use of force against them. The controversy surrounding the eviction only grew. As the news spread, more and more people began to speak out against the government's actions. Newspapers across the country ran stories about the brutality of the eviction, and public figures began to criticize the president's decision. It was a growing movement that threatened to engulf the nation. For President Hoover, the situation was becoming increasingly dire. The eviction had been a controversial move, and the negative publicity was damaging his reputation. He needed to find a way to turn the tide in his favor. That's when he turned to Douglas MacArthur, a decorated general and the man who led the eviction of the Bonus Army. MacArthur had been a controversial figure in the military, but Hoover believed that he was the man for the job. He tasked him with writing a letter to Congress, outlining the events that led to the eviction and justifying his actions. But little did he know that MacArthur had other plans. In his letter, MacArthur took full responsibility for the eviction and praised the military's role in maintaining order. He portrayed the veterans as dangerous and unhinged, claiming that they had threatened the safety of the capital. It was a masterstroke of manipulation that shifted the public opinion in Hoover's favor. For the moment, it seemed as though the president had won. But behind the scenes, the fallout from the eviction was far from over. After the eviction, many of the veterans and their families struggled to pick up the pieces. The violence had left deep scars, both physically and emotionally. The loss of life and the injuries sustained during the clashes were just the beginning. The psychological toll on the veterans and their families was immeasurable. The sense of betrayal and disillusionment ran deep. These were the men and women who had put their lives on hold to serve their country and defend its people. And now, they were being treated like enemies. But they weren't just any ordinary soldiers. They were part of the greatest generation, the ones who had answered the call of duty and defended the nation during its darkest hours. Now, it was their turn to receive some support. As the years went by, the story of the bonus army faded from the public consciousness, but the legacy of their struggle lived on. These brave men and women had shown incredible courage and resilience in the face of adversity. They had stood up for what they believed in, even when all odds were against them. Their story is a reminder of the importance of honoring our veterans and ensuring that their sacrifices are never forgotten. Today, we remember the bonus army not just as a footnote in history, but as heroes who deserve our admiration and respect. Their story is a testament to the power of the human spirit and the importance of standing up for what is right. If you think their story is over, you'd be wrong. Click here to find out what happened to them next, or click here to watch this video.